Today, the world is facing a huge crisis that affects a large portion of its population. I'm talking about malnutrition. This crisis is caused by 1, a lack of food, and 2, a lack of nutritional food. 795 million people in the world do not have enough food to lead a healthy and active life. Now I want you to think about this. That's about 1 in 9 people on Earth. Moving on to a crisis closer to home, the American water crisis. The Ogallala Aquifer, which is the largest and most important water source to America, is running dry. It extends from South Dakota down to Texas and supplies the majority of the world with grain. Alone, it supplies the world with about 1/6 of the total grain yields. And each year, this massive aquifer drops about 2 feet and is only recharged with about 3 inches of water. A study from the Kansas State University predicted that the aquifer would be 70% depleted by 2060 if irrigation practices do not change. However, the study further predicted that the aquifer could potentially last up to 100 more years if all farmers in the region cut their water use by, I want you to remember this number, 20%. The world population is rapidly increasing, and mankind cannot supply enough food, but more importantly, water to the people of the world. Now, history has shown that population increasing with depleted resources causes famine. For example, before the 14th century, Italy was going through a great period of time. Poverty was low, and people had more free time, and the arts expanded vastly. This caused a great increase in population, but eventually there were far too many people for Italy's resources to accommodate. After this, food prices rose and resources were scarce, thus causing great poverty and malnourishment. Death was soon to come. From 1314 to 1318, in only 4 years, 10% of Italy's population died. Now I want you to think about this. It's an estimated 1.3 million deaths. Saudi Arabia provides the most spectacular example of overdrawing a resource. The Saudis went after a huge Arabian aquifer with even more passion than their oil. Drilling 2,000 feet deep, the dunes soon turned green with grain, transforming the desert nation into a leading exporter in the 1980s and 1990s. Now the aquifer has all been but empty. This year, wheat wasn't even planted, and the deserts are bare. The Saudis are now growing alfalfa in Arizona and California. These pictures are when the aquifer was being used in abundance, and this is the farmland now. There are many effective, humane and inhumane ways to deal with these crises, such as reclaiming sewage water, desalinating ocean water, and reducing water usage down to a bare minimum. But the cheapest and most moral way of solving this man-made catastrophe is with a system of farming known as aquaponics. My name is Niko, and I'm presenting on aquaponics and its future for farming and my experience creating a unique aquaponics system. The Oxford Dictionary defines aquaponics as a system of aquaculture in which the waste produced by farm fish or other aquatic animals supplies nutrients for plants to be grown hydroponically, which in turn purify the water. I will also be mentioning hydroponics, which is similar to aquaponics, except instead of having the fish produce the nutrients, you add the nutrients yourself. Here's how it works. The fish are raised in tanks, troughs, or outdoor ponds where they produce excrement. The water and waste from the tank is then pumped into a hydroponics tray where the plants can grow in the water without soil. The waste produced by the fish is also toxic to the fish, but is rich fertilizer for the plants. And as the plants absorb the nutrients, the water is purified for the fish, and the clean water can then be recycled into the tank. The history of aquaponics. The Aztecs cultivated a system of agricultural islands known as chinampas, and a system considered by some to be the first form of aquaponics for agricultural use. Chinampas are networks of canals and stationary artificial islands in which they cultivated crops on these islands using nutrient-rich mud and water from the canals. The canals are full of farm fish, much like they are today in Arizona, and the waste from the canals was pumped into grow beds in the shallow water. They grew mainly maize and squash. And in the early chinampa system, plants were raised on stationary and sometimes movable islands in the lake shallows, and the nutrient-rich waste materials was dredged from the chinampa canals in the surrounding cities, was then used to manually irrigate the plants plants from above. Alright, while using aquaponics, water savings compared to soil farming can increase by 90%. The Kansas State University study I mentioned earlier showed that the Ogallala Aquifer will be functional for another 160 years on only a 20% decrease in water usage. Aquaponics allows for a 90% decrease in water usage, making the aquifer not only stabilize, think about this, but it'll actually be able to refill. Malnutrition can also be vastly less evident with aquaponics because of the huge increase in vitamin A, B, C, and E. This is due to the constant supply of fresh nutrients to the plants. Furthermore, no pesticides are needed because fish actually eat the insects and any waterborne larvae. After a few months of running the system, insect life should diminish to a bare minimum because of a failure to produce successful offspring. The only exception to this are insects that spend their entire lives on a few plants. Also, the fish produce all of the fertilizer needed for plant growth. This includes nitrates and nitrites. Fish release waste in the form of ammonia, NH3, which is toxic to all aquatic organisms. Bacteria then react with the ammonia to create nitrite, a compound which is toxic to fish as well. Nitrite is then converted into nitrate by a different set of nitrifying bacteria, and aquaponic plants absorb both the nitrate and nitrite, cleaning the water. Gotham Greens is a great example of aquaponics in use. Jen Frymark, a U of A graduate, planted and harvested over 100,000 heads of lettuce on the 75,000 square foot rooftop farm in Chicago. If she were to use normal soil farming, she could only plant about 33,000 crops at most because lettuce needs to be spaced at least 18 inches apart from each other with soil farming. The cost to run her rooftop farm is remarkably low because the farm is supported by wind and solar power. Jen Frymark succeeded in turning this rooftop greenhouse into a successful farm in the middle of Chicago. This, in theory, could be done anywhere. As you can see, aquaponics allows for crop cultivation to occur anywhere, meaning highly fertile soil is not needed for growth. You can even grow crops inside. Hawaii is a great example of where aquaponics can be found because they have a huge population relative to their amount of resources. Hawaii, a largely imported goods state, cannot function without the constant importation of goods to the state. To give you an idea about the severity of this, Maui can only go 3 days without imports before reaching a state of crisis. The Grand Huat Resort in Kauai converted one of its 4,000 square foot tennis courts into an aquaponics greenhouse, growing several varieties of lettuce such as red oak leaf and Lila Rosa. These are used by restaurants on site. It expects to produce about 100 pounds of greens a week, with plans to grow different crops including tomatoes and herbs by the end of the year. Jensen Udea, a junior extension agent for the University of Hawaii's college, stated, quote, "It especially makes sense in Hawaii. The islands are geographically isolated and dependent on imports. The state imports about 85% of its food, natural resources are limited, and the cost to do business here is high." End quote. The Waipoli hydroponic greens in upcountry Maui grows about 180,000 plants per year in a hydroponic greenhouse, producing up to 15,000 pounds of specialty lettuces a week. The Kawamata Farms in Waimea on the Big Island churns out more than 20,000 high-quality hydroponically grown tomatoes every week. Lee Bryant of May's Wonder Gardens in Hawaii says that he uses on average 90% less water than traditional dirt farming on his 38-acre hydroponic farm, one of the largest in the state. Many of the farmers support their hydroponic systems with either wind or solar power, reducing the cost vastly. Moving a little closer to home, Arizona is a great place for aquaponics because of the reliance on our water systems such as canals and our abundance of aquaponic cellars. This is a Google search of aquaponic cellars near us, and we have a whole bunch. There are 6 major aquaponic farms in Phoenix, but one I'll be focusing on today is Arrival Farms, started by Mark Ryan and his business partner Marlo Ibanez, who are both quite wealthy due to their previous business, but their health is extremely poor due to constant travel and eating calorie-dense, nutrient-lacking foods. They were both on blood pressure and cholesterol medications. Due to this, they decided to sell their company and start a farm in Phoenix. They soon discovered that the soil here has been brutally damaged by fertilizers and overuse, so they created an aquaponics system. They have tilapia in their system that nourish the water to feed the crops, which is in turn nourished by the leftover leafy vegetables, for getting rid of any nitrates or nitrites. They also have chickens. The chickens provide rich fertilizer for their composting system and are in turn fed by the crops that they grow. Ryan even raises black soldier flies to take care of the garbage problem there, and the insects provide him with larvae to feed the chickens and fish. Most of the farm is running on its own waste, lowering the cost of production. But more importantly, Ryan stated, quote, "We both lost a ton of weight, lowered our blood pressure and cholesterol, and stopped taking medication. All because we started growing and eating the organic food that we grow. So all we want to do now is grow very nutrient-dense food," end quote. Diet is the most important part of being healthy, and with this system of farming, you're able to eat food that you know is safe, healthy, and nutrient-dense. So, after I discovered aquaponics, I thought to myself, wow, this combines two of my favorite things, farming and fish. So I decided to give it a try. After looking through many designs, I settled on this, a gravity flow design with 2 grow beds that would be extremely easy for a beginner like me to use, but I wanted to make it original. So I drew up a few designs and went to the Home Depot to try to make my imagined creation a reality. Disclaimer, this was an OCD-fueled rampage of building, thinking, and algebra. I got 6 2x6x8 pieces of wood and then cut them into 12 pieces, half by 5 feet and the other half 3 feet. I then labeled them and began to assemble the main tank. The main tank was about 5 by 3 by 1.5 feet. The process of putting the tank together was slightly painstaking because every measurement had to be exact, or the water it would soon hold wouldn't be displaced properly and could destroy my system. So after I finished building the frame for the main tank, I decided to call my best Samoan friend PJ to help me finish this project. We started by adding a frame above the pond, like it is in my designs, and having a grow bed inside of it. Then another grow bed was placed beneath it to get rid of any other unabsorbed nitrates or nitrites. We then added high-strength pond liner to get rid of any leaks. The system was then ready to have water added to it. So, as you can see here, here's the main tank being filled up with water, and there's actually water being pumped through it at the moment. Here's the top hydroponic growing tray. So that water runs through a little pipe in here, and then they're going to be pretty strong plants in here. So there's that little pipe, and then that's going to get rid of any unabsorbed nitrates or nitrites, and then that water runs through that hole right there to irrigate the water for the fish. I then bought fish to produce waste for the plants, and I set it on goldfish and small cichlids. Here are the goldfish. This is a very successful system that grew mint and various other herbs, but I was only able to run it for a few months because my family moved in June of 2019. So, rest in peace, Niko's hydroponic system. Here's a picture of some of the plants I grew or supplemented. So, I later built my second aquaponics system after we moved. So after a large learning curve with the first system, I was ready to make a more successful and productive system. Before I left for Oklahoma, I decided to draw up a new system that could grow more plants and have more fish. After a few hours of drawing designs and some help with the math from Miss Bruder, I had the designs ready for my new system. I decided on a system with a round tank and a square base with a rooftop overhead. I came up with this design because I wanted to make a compact system to show the true possibilities that aquaponics has. So after a few hours of scrolling through Craigslist and several strange phone calls, I found a horse trough that would fit my need for the fish tank. At 5 feet wide and 5 feet long and 2 feet tall, it is approximately 300 gallons. After I bought the tank, I I immediately started building the frame. This part was primarily difficult because I needed to have all the angles right on 5 different sections. After hours of building the frame, I was ready to put all the pieces together. At this point, you can start to see the actual frame of my second aquaponics system. After a quick trip to the Home Depot to get 50 feet of 1/2 inch PVC pipe and to get some OSB board cut, I was ready to move onto the roof of the frame. This would soon hold the plants in pressurized water lines. The pressurized lines would soon be attached to a pump to move the water up through the system and back into the pond. This is the first night after I was done building. So here's the 300-gallon tank right here. So it's going to be filled up with water. This pipe right here is the high pressure line that would soon pump about 11,000 gallons per hour through these pipes back down into the tank. And you can see it snakes up and then back down, and it goes back around to the other side, and it goes back up, and then there's a little drain here where the water will be right there to be aerated for the fish. So I acquired an 11,000 gallon pump to pump the water at a rate so that the filtration of the water is extremely high. The recycle rate is nearly 37 times per hour, so the water would go through the tubes roughly around 890 times per day. The next step was to drill holes in the high pressure lines in the high pressure 1/2 inch PVC pipe to allow smaller outlets into larger PVC pipes for various plants. This is the first time running the system. As you can see, it snakes down back around to this other side back here, and then back around to that other side, and then goes back up the grow roof, all the way back up, then back around and down where the water is irrigated for aeration. It was then time to dechlorinate the water and add the fish to start the bacteria and nitrate production for future plants. The fish I chose for this part were goldfish and minnows because of the cheapness of the fish. I then planted mint as my first plant in the new system. Isn't that cool? I finally created a system that actually works. I also decided on duckweed, which is a floating plant that grows in water. A few days later, my friend and I went to go get a few lily pads that would reduce the nitrates until I could fully finish the system. This is a flower from the lily pads. After the system was proven to be safe for both plants and fish, I added tilapia, the best aquaponics fish, to the tank. Later that day, I added 2 grow tubes at the bottom part of my system, and then added several plants. Since the plant-to-water ratio still wasn't proper for filtration, I made a filter out of lava rock, a 5-gallon bucket, and a small pump to be used in the meantime. Every few weeks, I would clean the filter and use the top layer as fertilizer for potted plants around the house. After I finished building the other grow tubes, my system was complete, and the filter was no longer needed. And before the COVID-19 crisis, I was growing lettuce, celery, mint, cilantro, peppers, strawberries, wheatgrass, sunflower sprouts, pea shoots, sweet potato, radishes, broccoli, and I had the ability to grow 32 plants in a 5x5 foot of space. Since the COVID-19 closures, I added 39 more growing holes, totaling 71 grow holes. Now, not counting the hundreds of seeds and sprouts that I have growing, I now have 75 plants in the 5x5 foot area. I'm growing 2 types of lettuce, 4 types of mint, 3 types of onions, 2 types of sweet potato, celery, basil, bell peppers, cilantro, sage, watermelon, cucumber, strawberries, broccolis, chamomile, pea shoots, sunflowers, cantaloupe, tomato, leeks, spirulina, algae, and citronella. I'm pretty sure I'm the only person to successfully grow citronella aquaponically. To show you how much aquaponics can affect the amount of nutrients in each plant, here's the highest quality celery I could find versus a celery I grew. Which would you rather eat? I have found that most foods in the grocery store do not actually taste or look as good as homegrown, and especially not as good as aquaponically grown. Even if it says fresh and organic, the food is not at its full potential. As many of you know, people do not care how much you know unless they know how much you care. So to answer why I care and have dedicated so much time into hydroponics, aquaponics, and aquaculture, we would have to go back to 2016. And I was talking to a farmer named Dale Rimmick from Nebraska in a restaurant in North Scottsdale. I asked him, "What is the biggest crisis facing agriculture?" He replied without skipping a beat, "Water." We then got into a long conversation about aquifers, soil farming, and what can be done to fix this problem that we've created. This was when I first wanted to become a water rights attorney. Skip forward 1 year to 2017, and I was able to get a meeting with my priest at the church, Father Richard Morrison, founder of the Morrison Institute at ASU, who used to be a major water law attorney and is now a professor at U of A. We talked about schooling for me, and he suggested U of A, A&M, Baylor. And after this, I did some research and discovered how useful hydroponics, aquaponics, and aeroponics, and aquaculture are as sources of farming with limited resources. Earlier this year, I was talking with a professor at Baylor who attended A&M, and he said that he actually worked on conserving water and developing new ways of farming. He said even with effective soil and water techniques, farmers use the same amount of water on more crops instead of using less water on the same amount of crops. Aquaponics actually allows for more crops and less water. Even if the farmers do use the entirety of their land for aquaponics, the water savings is so extreme, they would still have a large water savings compared to soil farming. For example, here I have strawberries growing from the waste of a betta fish and a pleco. Strawberries are growing about 3 inches from each other at the base of the roots, and with soil farming they need to be about 10 to 12 inches apart to successfully grow. Also, here are some sunflower sprouts. The one to the left was soil grown, and the other one was aquaponically grown. They were both planted as seeds on the same day. Many organic farmers are against aquaponics because it by definition is organic and can lower the profit yield of organic farmers. Farmers have a large influence on politicians and the USDA, so the rules for what is and what is not organic can be changed easily. The summary of the final ruling of what can be deemed organic in 1990 states, the final rule amends the national list and prohibited substances and provisions of the USDA's organic regulations to implement recommendations submitted to the Secretary of Agriculture by the National Organic Standards Board. This rule changes the restriction of 17 substances allowed for organic production and handling on the national list. This rule also adds 16 new substances on the national list to be allowed in organic production and handling. End quote. This basically states that to be organic, you must not use chemical fertilizers, pesticides, or herbicides. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, "Niko, I thought you just said aquaponics doesn't need any fertilizers, pesticides, or herbicides." Well, you're right. Aquaponics is technically organic, but since there is no soil, and soil tests are the most common way of testing for violations of the 1990 ruling, organic farmers argue that aquaponics is not appropriate to be deemed organic. Today, the USDA has made organic certification for aquaponic plants possible, but extremely hard to obtain. I hope that I have convinced you that aquaponics is the answer to a few of the world's biggest problems. And not only does aquaponics provide humans with food, but with food that is actually better for you than what you can buy in grocery stores. It can be done almost anywhere on Earth and saves an astronomical amount of water, all while raising fish, in particular tilapia, which can have over 600 eggs at a time, allowing for aquaponic farmer to use the extra fish as a source of income, as tilapia are the most popular fish in the world. Without the institution of aquaponics, the world food supply will be greatly depleted by 2060 due to lack of water. Now, I have shown you it is possible to build a system for mostly common things around your house, and hopefully I've inspired you to be less prejudiced against aquaponics in its future, as it is becoming more and more necessary to change farming techniques. Thank you. Here are my works cited. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. I'm willing to answer anything you